Oh, Ed, are you there?
Oh, hey, Warren, how are you?
Doing pretty good.
That's good. I'm going to close my door because the dog decided to start barking.
I just had to chase mine out, so I understand.
It's the thing we have to deal with working from home.
Yeah, exactly. I'd
Yeah.
rather have this than
Yeah.
other problems.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, like sitting in traffic.
All right, a
Yep.
cubicle.
There's
Is my sound
another.
okay? Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I don't generally do the whole computer thing because I've had it mess up on me before. So I go with the call in. You should be able to see right now my screen though.
Yes, I do.
Okay, the webinar series. Basically, I can give you kind of a preview here. What I do is, where is it? Um, yeah, I don't know if you can see that. I give a little introduction. They can read it for themselves also. And then I get into housekeeping stuff. And
Okay.
in total, that takes about start to finish, I don't know, roughly about 30 seconds, just to kind of get everybody on the same page. So at the top of the hour, when we click over to live recording, I'll do that verbally, not just visually, but I'll go through the whole thing to the audience, and then I'll finish up. I'll click a box, and that you'll see a thing come up on your screen that says, "Do you want to share your screen?" In which case, you just click the yes, and your screen will come up instead of mine.
Okay.
So it goes pretty smoothly. As far as we don't allow anybody to be unmuted during the presentation just because of the background noise.
Right.
So I ask if they have a question, we want them to type it into the question function. And with that, most presenters, not all, but most of them have asked that I read those questions to them just so that they can kind of keep their train of thought on what they're looking at. So I've kind of gotten used to doing that. I try to fit them in as whether it's a break in the topic or just before a polling question or just after a polling question or something like that. So it's not too big a disruption.
Okay.
And if the question seems really out of bounds, like it's just, we talked about that 10 minutes ago, you know,
Right.
I made it slide. But other than that, I know that the go to webinar is not as sleek as what you can with some of the other services, but seems to work.
No, it works. No.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the only thing I'm worried about is that this presentation usually runs about an hour and a half, so I've got to step on the gas and push it across the finish line a little earlier, unless
Yeah.
you want it to
Yeah.
run long.
It's up to you. We can give them credit for whatever time they sit in, and if somebody has to leave at 60 minutes, they have to leave. They can come back and listen to it later or something like that. In fact, I can tell them while I'm doing the little whole housekeeping thing there, by the way, there's a good chance we're going to run over the time because of questions and answers and that sort of thing. This topic, I think, is going to draw a lot more questions
Yeah,
than
it should,
because
because you're hitting things at a very surface.
we're probably dealing with a different group of people here. I'm curious to see who they are. I'm going to go in and take a look later on. But hopefully my goal, which is probably why, same reason you put this together, was there's always people that are new in the business, new in the industry. They're transitioning from, another type of audit coming over to this.
Right.
If their company doesn't offer them some sort of an in-house training program, it's a lot to learn on your own. So kind of.
Yeah, it is. And it's got
In
its
fact, I
own
think
jargon and everything else. So it's unique.
you could probably. I mean, I don't mean you in particular, but I mean, I think somebody could do a week on this topic.
Oh yeah,
You know?
easily. Hell, insurance alone you can give an hour presentation on.
Yeah. Well, there's we just came across they solicited us, but I went on their website and I was looking at what they do. I'm sure you're familiar with these services that they line up webinars or podcasts or whatever it is on various subjects, and then they put them into their platform, and they get paid. For if you want to see it, you'll pay your $70 or whatever they charge you for it. But they also give out the CPD credits. Let me see, what were they called? Learn Format, I think was the name of the company. But I could honestly see somebody who had the time and the wherewithal to and the expertise, the credentials, to get on there and put together a 4-part or a 5-part program. The only thing that I think is a downside, which we're probably going to talk about with them if they ever call us, is it's self-learning versus live learning. I think there's a lot of difference there.
Yeah, the back and forth is helpful.
Yeah.
It's
my
hard
son,
to convey everything just off the bat.
Yeah. My kids are all in college at the same time, which is not great planning on my wife and I part, but
so you're poor.
That's an understatement. We saved what we thought was going to be the right amount of money. We could never dream that a college education would be more than like $25,000-$30,000 a year tops.
Oh, yeah.
This is going back when our kids were little, and that doesn't even cover like state schools now.
No.
So, anyway, but they were all, in the whole COVID thing, they were all taking those online classes and just hated them.
Oh, yeah.
Hated them. I can see why. I mean, that interaction, like the professor or not, it's such a different dynamic. So yeah.
And there are people
I
who
don't
can
think
present online well, and there are many people that cannot. So you can't expect a professor to be able to pull that together.
There's a lot of very smart people in this world who cannot present.
No.
It's just they know the subject matter inside and out, but they're monotone. They, for whatever reason, we had one person who did a presentation a couple of years ago during one of our virtual conferences, and the reviews were just horrific. And yet she's a powerfully intelligent woman, knows her subject inside and out, but just, it was tough. It was tough. She just had no kind of rhythm to her speech. But
it's tough to learn. I'm not sure I've got it down, but I'll do my best.
No, I can just tell by listening to your voice now that it's not. I just think that she's just one of those people, just, probably has an okay time when she's up in front of people because there's give and take.
Right.
But just coming up. Yeah. That I think is the hardest thing. Go ahead.
It is. Because you can kind of feed off a room and get a sense of how everybody is reacting to you. When you're in person online, you have no sense of that. So you don't know how to adjust the presentation to drag people's attention back towards you.
Yeah. Now, I don't know whether I'm not seeing it, but I don't know whether you put your video, your face up. That's entirely your prerogative. I don't do that, but I imagine with the technology, the Zoom calls or whatever, and you can actually see people's faces. It probably helps quite a bit. I find it very distracting. When I've been on conference call, and there's 8 people staring back at me. my train of thought goes everywhere.
Well, I'm too damn ugly. I don't want to do that. You know?
I got that with. Plus, we're still remodeling half the house, and so I'm stuck in the spare bedroom. You know, so it's not. Hey, I'd have to pull down half the stuff in this room just to make it look sort of like an office. But it is what it is. Did you ever get a chance to follow up on that lead that Brian sent you, or did he ever call you, that man?
Oh, from Sloan Kettering?
I'm not sure.
Oh, was it? Well,
That
he
might
sent
be-
me two. He sent me one from Sloan Kettering and one from Tribe out of Omaha.
Omaha, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I got in touch with them, and they said that they were going to issue a public request for proposals, so they would include me on the RFP, but nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah, which
nothing.
yeah, I hate trying to compete with the locals that I mean, let's face it, we know everybody that does this, and I know there's not anybody really around the Omaha area.
When I was 20 years ago, when I was running an organization for construction estimators, I used to hear that lament all the time, that they knew that their number was nothing more than a backdrop to the preferred contractors. They had to do their due diligence, so they had to get 3 estimates, sort of thing. So
Right.
that kind of annoying. I usually wait till, I think we got 34, but we had 80 people register.
Okay.
So I usually give it an extra minute before I click over to the start button, just because I think it takes people a little longer to log on than they imagine it did. So let's get ready to go here, though. Hide control panel. Session is being recorded. Did we already hit record?
I don't think so. I didn't hit it.
It says this session is being recorded. Oh my goodness.
It sure does. Okay, well that's great.
If you folks can hear us, could somebody let you?
More terms. I'm not going to go through like the Occupational Safe and Health Administration or owner and materials. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Retainage is one that you probably haven't heard before if you've not been in this industry. Each billing, typically there is a holdback for the owner. So let's say that the bill is $2 million. Well, a contract will set an amount for retainage, which is 5-10%, it's defined. And basically it is an escrow fund to ensure that the owner gets what they paid for. So make sure the contractor actually delivers. So for a period of time, each and every billing will have retainage taken out of it and put into an escrow account, and that retainage will be returned at some point later on in the construction life cycle. Shared savings, this is something I'm probably going to cover more in the next section on contract types, but that is a clause in a guaranteed maximum price contract where if a contractor doesn't achieve a certain cost, if they come under budget, the resulting savings will be shared between the contractor and the owner. A subcontractor is the group that basically is the hires the trades. These are companies that employ craft labor workers. So this is your ABC Electrical, your big time drywall company, or all cool heaters and air conditioners or something like that. Subsistence. You'll see subsistence in larger projects, and that's just some jobs offer workers a stipend to temporarily relocate to a project site. So that stipend is generally set in the contract. So you'll pay a worker $100 a day for lodging and meals, something along those lines. But subsistence refers to some amount established in the contract to pay workers to relocate to the site. You can actually find more terms through, believe it or not, Indeed.com, the job site. They define a lot of the construction industry terms. ProS.com also has a very nice list. And if you want to pay a little money, you can go to RS Means Company, and they have an entire, basically, dictionary of construction terms. But anytime you have a question, and if you're running across and auditing one of these things and something doesn't make sense, just know that there are many resources out there. You can look up the jargon and find out what they're talking about. And different industries have other unique jargon. I guess the best example I can come up with is I've worked in the power and petrochemical business. And on the power business, they talk about the HRSG, which is nothing more than a heat exchanger in a gas-fired power plant. Once again, they have weird names for a lot of different stuff, so don't be intimidated by that. You can easily go out there and find out what this stuff is by just doing a little bit of an internet search. So now the meat and potatoes, the types of contracts. Lump sum, fixed cost, stipulated sum. So this is a contract type where a contractor says basically, I'm going to build this building based on your plans and specifications, and I will get it to you for $60 million, just making up the amount. There is probably a schedule component, like substantial completion, that will be achieved within 24 months of the contract effective date, something along those lines. But really what it comes down to, I'm going to deliver X for Y dollars. Cost plus and time and material, very similar. Cost plus with a fixed fee or percentage. I'm going to do the project for whatever it costs, the actual cost of the project, with an agreed upon markup. Cost plus with a guaranteed maximum price. They also call that a GMAX. We will build this building for our actual costs and markup not to exceed 60 million. So they've got a cap. They've got a not to exceed amount that they're agreeing to contractually. And the cost plus GMAX with a shared savings, like I talked about earlier. That's, let's use the 60 million as an example. We are agreeing as the contractor to build this project for no more than $60 million. And if we come in under that, the shared savings, whatever, let's say we built it for 50 million, we'd have a $10 million shared savings. There is some contractually established split in the contract, 50-50, 60-40, whatever it is. But the shared savings clause is supposed to incentivize your contractor to go out there and save money so that they can participate in a shared savings. Time and material, very similar to cost plus. It's typically open-ended. Are no cap on the costs. Profits will be incorporated into rates. Let's say you'll have a table of labor rates in your contract. So it'll say, plumbers cost $70 an hour, welders cost $85 an hour. So the contractor's profit is in the labor rates, and they'll pass along actual material invoices, and the time that was logged by their craft personnel will be charged at these rates, and that's how they make the profit. Finally is unit price. And a unit price contract, you don't see a whole lot of them because they're in very specific industries. What this means, there's a contract that is based on some unit, let's say distance, volume, and that's the cost driver. So you see this a lot in pipeline work. So a unit of installed pipe is charged at a set contractual rate. Road resurfacing, that's another good one. Per half miles, they'll charge X amount of dollars per half mile. Large concrete pours, they'll charge by the cubic yard of concrete poured. Basically, some unit installed is the mechanism that the contract is charged. So now that I've given you a little bit of a background on types of contracts that are used, why audit a construction project? I think the most important is that management's concerned and has some exposure. So many times an operational manager or worse yet, a facilities person gets tasked with overseeing or the responsibility of a project, and they need help or just more eyes on the project. Many times, let's say you're in a large computer manufacturing company, your job is overseeing the production process of computers. So building a new facility is not really your area of expertise, but you might be the closest thing the organization has, and you might get tasked with being the manager or responsible executive over that project. And those people generally need a little extra help and an extra set of eyes to make sure that things are going properly. Construction projects are pricey. Many construction projects actually are the largest expenditure that an organization makes. So it makes sense to have extra eyes on it and a little bit more process around it, around the transactions. Delays can always result in lost market opportunities. So having an audit come in and look at risks to schedule are very important. You're at least providing an extra set of eyes to the stakeholders to ensure that things are happening the way they were designed. Provides monitoring not available elsewhere. So taking kind of a holistic view of a project and the team surrounding that project, looking at risks from various angles and coordinating with all the stakeholders. You'd be surprised, a lot of that coordination doesn't really occur. You've got a lot of people that enter and leave the picture during a construction project, but very few people are really there all the time looking at all the pieces. Audit can provide that function to an organization. And you provide a means for keeping projects on track. So the independence of an auditor can highlight problems and help them get addressed. Basically, the auditor is not working for the project manager, often not working for the executive that is overseeing the project. So the auditor can be, quite frankly, honest and let the stakeholders know what's really happening and what they see. Goals of a construction audit. Identifying cost avoidance opportunity and managing risk. I say that identifying potential risks and mitigating those risks before they turn into actual project costs is the key. It's always easier to stop a payment than it is to ask for it back after you've paid it. Ensuring controls are developed and maintained. You want to look at the contract that governs the project, identify the risk areas, ensure you have policies and procedures in place. Let's say change management, QA, QC procedures, quality control, quality assurance. Somebody looking at actual concrete pours, making sure they're done properly, because once pipe and conduit is covered up by concrete, you don't have another chance to get in there and see it. So having someone there taking pictures before things happen, looking at what is going to be covered up and documenting that might be key later on down the road. If contractors are required to verify or validate something, make sure their controls are in place and that they have proper procedures and processes there to address whatever they're contractually required to do. Identifying overcharges and undercharges. Like I said earlier, there's something, you have a lot of moving parts on one of these projects and tons of documentation. There's going to be errors, there are going to be overcharges and undercharges. I really want to point out identifying undercharges. You might think, if I'm auditing my company's project or I'm auditing a project for a client, why would I point out where the contractor hasn't charged enough money? Let me just say this. Contractors don't stay in business that don't regularly charge enough money. So that's not going to be a common occurrence. But when you do find that, and you do, it's good to highlight it. It shows that you're being fair, and it adds a little bit more credibility to you in the audit process. And finally, avoiding litigation. And I'll say this, no party with any sense wants to litigate a construction case. These cases are far too complex for most juries to fully grasp. And I'll give you a quick kind of story. And you'll think I'm lying, but it's actually true. A few years ago, I was called for jury duty. And I was out in the hallway talking to my fellow juror, potential jurors, and we didn't know what the case was about. We sat down and had a chance to talk a little bit more. I had a gentleman sitting next to me. I found out he dropped out of high school and was scooping ice cream for a living. And then the lawyers came in the room and said, okay, this is a case that relates to the plaintiff is basically making claims that a contractor was engaged in fraudulent practices related to one of the projects. So immediately I got interested. I'm like, wow, all this weird experience I've got in this little niche of construction auditing is actually going to do some good in the community and not just provide a paycheck at the end of the day. But before you know it, they start walking through, does anybody in this room have any construction experience? And of course, I raised my hand, I proudly announced to everybody, yeah, several years, I've been a consultant, I've worked for many companies working on construction projects. And they were all real impressed by that. And I'm thinking, hey, I might actually be the jury foreman at the end of the day. Then they ask about fraud, and the attorney gives this little speech about what fraud is in his mind. And I raised my hand, I correct him. I said, no, fraud is actually about intent. You have to prove the intent of the parties. It's not enough just to say that they took something, they had to intend to deprive somebody of money and what have you. And I'm thinking, I'm a shoo-in. This is a great deal. Well, I was the first juror removed from the jury pool, and the ice cream scooper guy next to me was put on the jury. So it goes to show that at the end of the day, you're not litigating a case for a group of people that actually understand the industry. You're litigating a case in front of people who may have absolutely no knowledge of the construction process whatsoever. So honestly, going to court related to a construction case is gambling. When I have done litigation support work for clients or employers, basically there's been a death involved. There were either federal or public funds that were involved that carried some ramifications to it, or the fraud was so just outright blatant that it was difficult to say anything otherwise. Other than those instances, just a dispute over a contract or some pricing differences, or you charge me a little bit too much here or something like that, it doesn't rise to the level of going to litigation and the risk that's involved in that, because it could go any way. And I've worked on both the contractor side and the owner side, and I can tell you that it doesn't really favor anyone. The construction life cycle. So you have to, I hope you guys can read this. We've kind of come up with this process. So let's say the initiation is really where an owner is determining what they want or what they need. The planning process, so you're based on what you want, you figure out how you're going to do it, how you're going to finance it, what are the operational needs, coming up with business case analysis, that sort of thing. Then you've got the architectural and engineering selection. So selecting who's going to design this project, who's qualified to put our vision into a formal design and establish plans and specifications. Then we've got the design process where they actually do that. They put the designs and specifications together. Then you've got that selection of the prime contract and contract type. And we have this as the same step. It can be two entirely different steps, but usually you're negotiating a contract shortly after or in conjunction with identifying and selection of a contractor or construction manager. So you're developing the contract to govern kind of how this relationship is going to go. Then you have subcontractor selection. So how much you as the owner, how much do you want to be involved in the selection of subcontractor? You know, does your organization, is it important to have minority or women-owned business participation? Do you want, especially if you're in a smaller or remote location, do you want local subcontractors? Do you want to keep your money kind of in the local area, or do you mind if they go out and hire big, you know, nationally known subcontracting or contracting firms to come in and work on your project? Then you've got the actual construction phase. So the workers are out there, the materials are being delivered, they're delivering the project. Finally, closeout. So this is after everything's pretty much built. You're ready for the final billing from the contractor that rolls up all of those remaining costs. You've walked through the building, you've established that tile's loose, the carpet's a little wonky over there in the corner, I got a smudge on the wall, the punch list items, which are the things that they're saying, I want this corrected before we sign off and say you're done. And then the most important part of the process, in my opinion, is the lessons learned. So if you're going through and you're building things regularly, you want to see what you did well and what you didn't do well and apply that going forward to the next construction project. Now, I can also tell you that anytime you put a company's controls under some sort of stress and a construction project does that, you find holes and opportunities for improvement. So you can apply your lessons learned on a big construction project to another project, let's say software implementation, or something else that requires a collaboration between cross-functional teams and a great capital spend, something out of the ordinary based on your current experience, your company's current expertise. So anything that requires that cross-functional team in the administration of large project-based contracts, you can use the lessons learned on something like a large construction project to apply to other types of projects. So how are construction projects managed? You can have inside or outside project manager. We also call those an owner's representative or company officer. I'd say the most common for large projects that I've seen has a company hiring or contracting a independent contract or a contract manager or owner's rep to come in and represent the company. They usually have any number of engineers maybe working for them. They're going to bring maybe a little team with them depending on the nature of the project. So when assessing controls and risks as an auditor, if they've brought on an outside project manager or owner's representative, you need to sit down and look at their contract and determine what their responsibilities are, what their scope is, and the role they play within basically the overall project control structure. So you know what you need to test that they're supposed to do and what others are supposed to do. and how they hand off things between different parties within the organization. You can have an executive committee overseeing a project. In very few cases, there are architects I've seen that manage the construction project, but that's been few and far between from my experience. I've been very heavily in power and petrochemical, large, very technical projects where an architect wouldn't be involved. You usually have a big engineering firm. So the owner's project team. Oh, I thought I had the sound. Didn't think I had any sound on one of these. I apologize for that. You can have basically the project manager or owner's representative. You should have purchasing involved. Legal should have fairly continuous involvement. Contract administration, and this may be in or outside of the purchasing function. A lot of these big projects will have, your core kind of construction project where you've got one or two prime contractors doing aspects of the construction, and you may have multiple ancillary projects that are running concurrently. There may be multiple agreements, and you need someone looking at all of the agreements, ensuring the right terms and conditions are in place, that all the parties are maintaining the proper insurance and it's up to date, and that whatever the requirements of the organization, whatever the specific purchasing policies and guidelines are followed. They can also serve as a repository for all the key documentation. So I've seen this role combined with document management as well. Finance and accounting should be involved. Auditing, of course. And you can have tax and risk management involved on a consulting basis. Tax, you might have sales tax issues. If your organization is looking at property tax basis and cost segregation studies, your tax department may be more involved in looking at how the project is accounted for and whether or not the components are broken down in the proper buckets. Risk management, I have OCIP written off on the side there. That we commonly call that OSIP. You have an OSIP or a CSIP, and that stands for an owner-controlled insurance program or a contractor-controlled insurance program. All that means is that for a large project, it might be advantageous for the owner to go out and purchase the required insurance policies, provide the workers' comp, because they get better rates on it. So ultimately it would save money, but it requires the owner to handle the administration of the entire insurance program. So a bigger organization's risk management function might oversee the OSIP portion of a construction project. CSIP means that you're buying it all kind of as a wrapped up it's a wrapped up service provided by your contractor, so they provide the insurance coverage in their cost. So now we're going to go to the first polling question.
Walter, we might need to sneak a couple in. We got some folks that have to drop off at 15 minutes that were asking me about will we be able to get them in. So in the 50 minutes. So I'll go ahead and launch this first one. Give everybody a chance to vote. Gonna give it another 5 or 10 seconds. Like we've got everybody voted. Okay. Almost down the middle. True 53%, false 47%.
I'll continue stepping on the gas here and see if we can. Oh. External organizations. So these are the entities that may have individual contracts with the owner outside of the construction manager or contractor. Let me go ahead and get all these up here because somehow the sound got incorporated into this and I find it distracting. So I'm gonna.
Can't hear it.
Okay. So we've got the architect, engineer, construction manager, general contractor, essentially the same thing. Owner's representative, subcontractors, testing and surveying. So groups outside the project owner that may have their own contracts, scope of service. These are the services you need to be aware of and possibly incorporate into your audit work. As far as testing and surveying, you want to understand where they fit in and what they provide as far as the QA, QC process, and who are they responsible to? Are they working for the construction manager? Are they working for the engineer architect? Are they working directly for the owner? Typical project organizations, I'm not going to go through these in a whole lot of detail, but let me just put it to you this way. The project organization should fit your organization and your project. There's a lot of different ways that this can be structured. And really the differences, and the ones I'm going to show you, is you've got an owner with an architect and everybody is answering to the architect. Honestly, I don't see this at all. I generally see something along these lines where you've got an architect answering to the owner, the general contractor, everybody who's actually doing the work is feeding up to the general contractor. So your main focus, if you're auditing the primary agreements, would be between the architect, the service agreement between the owner and the architect, and the general contractor and the owner. Alternates where you have a testing firm and the testing firm is related directly to the owner. You could have the testing firm hired by the general contractor or the architect engineer. What I'm getting to is you've got a lot of different ways these things can be set up. You need to understand the basic organization and the kind of the contractual relationships. Who's responsible to whom? Who's reporting to whom? And what controls are around each one of those relationships with the owner. You just want to know the main touch points and what kind of policies, procedures, controls do you need to test to make sure that it's being done correctly. And what are the main compliance risks in those contracts? What are they supposed to deliver? And can you verify that? This is probably closer to what you normally see, where you've got some sort of owner's project team. I think the next slide, well, let me go back. I'd say in an ideal world, especially for much larger projects, you're going to have the whole project team where you've got your outside counsel, your audit, your owner's rep. Everybody is by committee almost managing this project. The owner's rep is really the face of your organization with the contractor. They're the one out there every day. They're walking the site. They're looking at the progress and the quality, and basically they're the owner's eyes every day on the project. You ask for the architect or the engineer to provide some consulting sort of advice, but at the end of the day, they're not engaged on a fairly continual basis. It's the construction manager, all the firms working for the general contractor or construction manager who are there daily, and your owner's rep who are really there. When audit shows up, you're trying to get with all of these parties, probably not so much the architect engineer, but you're talking a lot to the contractor and maybe even some of the bigger subs, and discussing issues with the owner's rep quite a bit, because once again, they're the ones that are really verifying that things are being done correctly. And you might confer with outside counsel or some of the other executives on the project management team to make sure that their concerns are being addressed. So what's the best organization for a project? So the best project structure simply just fits with the needs and the type of project. So whatever the owner's needs are and the type of project you're building, the structure should accommodate that. There's not really a perfect structure out there. If the project requires a lot of digging, let's say, then you might want the geotesting firms to be incorporated into the process to ensure the project isn't, digging into granite. You don't want a project, you probably want to have a project manager coordinating with, let's say, the engineer to revise plans if something comes up, and coordinate, negotiate with the contractor to help change scope. So if you're building an add-on or an addition to an office building, a simple project structure might be fine. Once again, it all comes down to what does your project need? What's the owner structure like? Are you typically an organization that has a lot of oversight and a lot of policy and procedure in place? And will that accommodate something like this? Or do you need to develop an entirely different sort of corporate structure around your building program? So we'll get to the next polling question fairly quickly.
Yeah, we might need to sneak in another one really quickly because we're coming up on 50 minutes.
Okay, I think we can.
Looks like we're going to get to our voting being done because everybody's given the same answer here.
That's good.
Hurry
That
up
means
and
I was
vote,
clear.
folks. 100%
Okay.
true.
And that would be correct. So how should you select projects for audit? Ultimately, it comes down to where the risk is, and what do the stakeholders really worry about. You can look at, the size of the project. What's the value? How much money are we talking about? What kind of contract type are you using? Using cost plus, lump sum? Are there shared savings clauses? All the little moving parts in there that present, some risk if things aren't tracked properly. Is the project highly visible? Is quality or cost the driver? What's the experience of the owner's representative or the contract manager or project manager that you've hired on? How good are they? Have they worked in this project before? How about the general contractor? Have they been a sole source for your company for a long time? Are they a little bit too embedded in your organization? Has this contractor built something like this before? So I'm going to focus a lot on cost plus contracts, mainly because it's probably the easiest to explain. So when you're looking at a cost plus contract, and this is really any contract, labor, materials, equipment, subs, and general condition, that's 85 to 90% of your cost. The rest of it, insurance, bonds, small tools, relocation, all that's just 10 and 15%. I'm not saying you're not going to find anything in, let's say, insurance and bonds. You probably will, but the vast majority of your focus and a lot of the risk is going to reside in the top 5. So digging into it a little bit more, labor, you're going to look at rates and fringes, subsistence, that stipend to pay people to relocate, any uncompensated or overcompensated overtime. If there are not to exceeds that are set up in the contract, you want to make sure they're not ignored. Travel and reimbursement. Lately, I haven't seen a lot of travel guidelines and a lot of contracts. You might end up seeing a lot of first-class airfare being charged or high-cost meals. I end up asking for the contractor's own travel policy if there's nothing that specifically speaks to that in the contract, and you compare the costs against their internal travel policy. It at least gives you a basis to assess reasonableness. Union rates, if you're lucky enough to deal with a project in union rates, that means labor burden is easy because it's set by collective bargaining agreement. And of course, you've got issues like ghosts potentially on the payroll. Did people get paid who weren't there? And are the contractor controls sufficient to catch it? So do they have sufficient controls over their labor to be able to catch if people are sneaking erroneous costs through on the payroll register?
Walter,
the
can I
materials-
sneak in that last?
Go ahead.
Can I sneak in that last one? Yeah, folks are asking me. Just so everyone knows, we I'm going to go right to the last one. We start the clock when the presenter starts speaking. So he didn't start speaking till almost 5 after the top of the hour. So please vote quickly.
Oh, Well, I'll run through this as quickly as I can. On the materials side, it's pretty straightforward. You want to make sure that if basically any cost to the contractor should be passed to the owner in a cost reimbursable contract. So if there were trade discounts or any other discounts that were passed to the contractor, you want to make sure they pass to the owner. You want to make sure that scrap and returns are properly credited to the owner, and let's say rework, meaning that they messed up something and they had to buy more material. You don't want to have to pay twice for the same work to be done. So the equipment side, large contractors generally own their own equipment companies. You want to check rates to market rates. There's something called the AED Green Book out there that's a good source, or you can just call around to local providers and see if their rates are in line with what's being charged. You want to make sure there's no rent to own or the rental charges exceed actually the purchase price. You know, basically you paying more in rent than you would if you just bought the thing. Excess damage, you know, sweetheart deals, did brother-in-law equipment incorporated rent to the project? Taxes on fuel, often off-road diesel, basically that they call it dyed diesel, shouldn't have all the normal vehicle taxes applied to it unless they're out there filling up their personal trucks. Equipment not on the job. So a lot of higher end equipment has GPS on board, and you can obtain a report that tracks the location and usage of the equipment. There are also fueling reports. Equipment's not running if they don't put fuel in it. So a fueling report can give you a pretty good idea of whether or not equipment's being used or not. And rental rebates not credited. One of those things where if it's something that's given as a credit to the contractor, it should be passed to the owner. Insurance, the requirements of the contract determine if the coverage is in place and that the coverage is billed properly. Problem is a lot of the contractors self-insure, so this complicates verification a little bit. Bonds, it's the same deal. You want to make sure that if a bond was required in the contract that it was provided and you weren't just billed for something that wasn't provided. Home office charges, are they allowable or not? Were permits and licenses obtained? Fines, was it the owner's action that caused the fine or the contractor's action? Mathematical errors. You wouldn't think in this day and age everybody's using or generating billings through some sort of electronic means, spreadsheet if nothing else, but I can tell you on almost every project I'm catching some sort of math error. I mean, you're moving a lot of money and a lot of paper, so it's bound to happen. Contract T&M. Problems that you generally run into on a normal time and materials contract. Incorrect labor rates. They might mess up classifications of people. So you might have an individual that somehow hops between helper, apprentice, journeyman, supervisor. Often there's a reason for this, but if you catch it, you've got to kind of run it down and ask the questions and find out what the reason was and if it makes sense. Use of incorrect material markups for something that should be very simple. These contracts can incorporate very complex markup formulations, and you have to make sure that they're applied correctly. On the stipulated sum, lump sum side, you paid for something to be built per plans and specifications. So you want to make sure if the quality or quantity were not delivered, you have a problem. Materials were outside specifications. I've worked on projects where I climbed up on a roof and the AC systems that were spec'd in the plans and specifications were not what was installed. Had to go back in and figure out what the cost differential was to report to our client. I caught a cinder block wall that wasn't at the density that was spec'd, and it was causing water to penetrate and created mold and other damage to the building. We had to try to come up with some methodology to price how that occurred and what the correction would cost. The quantities not installed, let's say concrete's poured several inches short of spec. So on like 100,000 cubic feet of a slab, if you had a couple of inches shaved off, that's maybe $150,000 of concrete that they've charged you for but not delivered. You have incorrect construction methods that might have been employed, so vents not properly flashed, exterior outlets are not rated for the outdoors, things not readily apparent but could end up costing the owner a lot in the long run. And you paid for the right thing to be installed and it wasn't, or you paid for something to be installed correctly and it wasn't. Big ones, insurance not purchased, even though something may have never happened on the project and you may not find out until after the fact. That was a service or a protection that was paid for in the lump sum cost, and if they did not provide or have insurance in place during the project, you didn't get what you paid for. Once again, the other problems are front-end loading, top loading. Really, that's more of a cash flow issue. A lot of contractors are going to stack their billing up front, so they're going to say they did more than they did in the beginning so that they can front-end load the billing. So it's keeping them from having to go out and obtain any sort of construction loans to get your thing built, or having to incur any sort of interest on additional funds for startup or for construction. They want you to basically finance the construction all the way through. And some contracts are very upfront about it and discuss how the payments are going to occur in order to take care of the contractor's kind of cash flow needs. But it can be a little bit over the top at times. And when cost of capital is a concern for an organization, this might be something that you need to look at as an auditor. To be honest with you, the biggest findings I've ever had have been on lump sum contracts. It may sound weird, but some of the most just bizarre stuff happens in lump sum because they think it's hidden. It requires a little bit of digging and a little bit of more analysis, but it's an area that if you're willing to if you have the time to put in on it and look at the intricacies of the agreement, you can find quite a bit. Unit price, the biggest issues are that mobilization and demobilization, so basically moving stuff to and from the project, not just the installation of whatever it is, getting people and equipment on site and moving it off site are generally separate prices in the agreement. You want to make sure that whatever they charged was stated in the agreement and it was properly charged. And the other one is improperly measuring quantity verification. So the contractor basically misreports or misrepresents what was installed in order to inflate billings. So the third polling question.
Well, we already went through that. There was a miscue on it, so I moved us right ahead to number 4.
Perfect. I hope they got that.
We're done with questions.
Okay, excellent. Well, then I don't have to worry about it. Contract types. Let's see. This is basically where your risk resides. So I've have this line here representing where your higher contractor risk is compared to owner risk. So I'm saying that stipulated sum, lump sum, fixed price. Honestly, a lot of the true risk resides on the contractor side. So an ideal scenario for this contract type is for a fully designed project where all the plans and specifications are in place. It's handed over to the contractor. They know exactly what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and they can price it accordingly. The risk is the contractor is exposed to volatility in the labor markets or material costs. I was involved in a building program for power plants back in about mid-2000s. What had happened was our projects were so massive that we tied up a lot of craft labor, so welders, pipe fitters, things like that, and a lot of the steel supply and pipe supply. So two things happened. Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, and all of a sudden, welders and pipe fitters could make 2 to 3 times more working on the refinery projects, doing repairs based on what was damaged by the hurricane. And we had to pay them anywhere from $100 to $120 an hour to get welders on site. We had a large shipment of steel coming in from China on one of those huge container ships. And during a storm, that ship went down in the Pacific. So that drove material costs up by 130% on the project. Well, the contractor was left with 3 options: eat the cost, claim force majeure, basically things outside of their control, acts of God occurred, which caused them to need to back out of the contract, or we were forced to negotiate a change order with them to compensate them for their costs. And that's what ended up happening, because it would actually have cost the owner a lot more money if they backed out and us having to go out and find a new construction company to pick up where they left off. So it was just easier for us to go ahead and help them with the additional cost and labor and the material problems. Unit price, that's once again a little higher on the contractor side. It's repetitive work, pipelines, roads, concrete pours. The site hadn't been accurately inspected would be the biggest risk. I was on a pipeline project where it was on an old surface mine, strip mine, and apparently the company had buried all sorts of stuff basically in the old pits where we were running a pipeline through, and that was not discovered, and the construction company had to issue a bunch of change orders to us because what they had expected to be a fairly easy trenching process was not, because they were running across just crap everywhere. Once again, you got the cost plus and guaranteed maximum price. I would say out of everything, it's good for most project types. It really promotes a collaboration and some transparency. The only drawback is it requires a lot more administration from both sides. The contractor's got to put together all the transactional level detail to back up the billing, and someone on the owner's side's got to actually look at it. Cost plus, if your scope is unknown, I mean, if you've got something kind of halfway designed but not quite finished yet and you're still working on it, but you really need the project to get started, or the budget hasn't been fully set, this is probably your best route. It requires a lot of oversight from the owner as well as established and agreed upon processes. Finally is your pure time and material. This is ideal for small capital projects where the design may change, like an office remodel, simple improvements, but once again, it requires a lot of verification and oversight from the owner. You want to have a mechanism in place to shut the work off if you think things are getting out of hand. Now, in the real world, contracts are not purely one type. They're typically multiple elements of varying types in one contract. So a lump sum agreement, you could have a design build or a design phase that may be cost reimbursable. So the contractor has design and engineering expertise in-house. So they're doing basically the architectural engineering work, and they may have a portion of the agreement that has all the travel, the testing, the permit applications, and the hours involved in the design work. That could be cost reimbursable, but the actual construction process could be lump sum. You may have an instance where the project may incorporate an open book period, which is really what happens if I encountered this on petrochemical and power plants. You've got a largely complete design in place, but you still have some things that need to be worked out from a design perspective. So what the contractor will do is have a cost reimbursable portion of their contract until a completed design is done. And that way they can go ahead and estimate the rest of it and basically set a price. So it's open to a point during the open book period, and then they will establish a firm fixed price at some point. You may have a project that incorporates provision for labor escalation and material cost increases. And I can tell you on the prior example, I was talking about Katrina, that same contractor, the next contract they had very specific terms related to labor escalation and material cost escalation. Engineered equipment, that may be and what I'm talking about when I say engineered equipment, let's say a very specific manufacturer needs a piece of equipment that is used only in that manufacturing process. There may be one firm in the world that makes it, and the contractor may not want to be responsible for its installation or even handling it. So everything, the building and everything around this piece of equipment may be contracted by, or maybe under contract with the general contractor, but this one piece of engineered equipment may be provided and installed by another firm. So you may be dealing with two entirely different contracts and the coordination between the efforts of those two parties. The agreement may include incentives for meeting project milestones or safety goals. Usually these are time or schedule driven incentives and things that as an auditor you'd need to go and make sure that they were properly achieved prior to payment. On the cost plus guaranteed maximum price side, you may have general conditions that are at actual cost or they could be fixed. Your subcontracts can be lump sum subcontracts in a cost reimbursable contract. I've even run across GMP subs on a GMP contract. So you've got a subcontract that is as complex to audit as the actual prime contract it's under. And you can even have unit price contracts within, at subcontracts within a GMP contract or guaranteed maximum price contract. Finally, your contractor markup or profit can be fixed, percentage of the work. It just depends on how it's set up. So its calculation may be variable. You have to make sure you understand all of the markup methodology in any given contract. And even some change orders may end up being fixed price. So even in a cost reimbursable contract, you may have change orders that deviate from the original kind of contract terms and fix certain portions of the contract, which makes auditing kind of a nightmare. Elements of a typical construction audit program. You can look at the bid process. I can tell you that that portion I like to get in on is really the contract review. This is where you can actually make the most difference. You want to make sure that if there are any conflicts in contract language or missing terms or overly contractor favorable terms, that you can bring these up before the contract is executed. You'll actually save more money probably for your owner in that phase than any other phase of the construction audit program or process. Control assessment, we said project manual, financial operations. You're really looking for whether or not the proper processes and procedures are in place, who's responsible for what, are there segregation of duties issues. In the project organization, does it support the owner's objectives like that cost, schedule, quality? And are there inherent risks of the project that need to be addressed? Billing testing, you're going through looking at labor, materials, equipment, subcontractor charges, what we talked about earlier. On a typical construction audit program, I would say that the permits and licenses are good. Miscellaneous charges, small tools, consumables, overhead charges, contractor fees. Make sure the markups are applied correctly. If you identified the costs that were incorrectly billed somewhere previously, you want to make sure if certain percentages for overhead or contractor fee, or even a blanket percentage that's related to small tools or consumables that's applied to the cost of project. Saying if you have an element that fee was applied to that you already took exception to in your prior audit process, you want to make sure that you apply all the fees that were applied when it was billed. So if you've got a $100 whatever that you've already said is not appropriate based on the terms and conditions of the contract, and they applied a 10% overhead charge and a 5% contractor fee, when you isolate that $100 exception, you have to also apply the overhead and contractor fee on that as part of your exception, because that's how it was presented in the billing. You want to look at the retainage calculation, that holdback or that escrow account that happens in each one. Make sure that the contractor, when they are producing the bill, they're supposed to be taking into account retainage. Make sure that's calculated properly. If there was a performance bond or insurance or home office charges, you want to look at those as well. So typical construction audit program, you're looking at contractor billing, physical inspection review of the engineering and inspection reports. You want to look at any external reports, meeting minutes, any project documentation. The more you know about the project, the better you can present findings within relevant context. So you know what's happening in and around whatever finding that you come across. There may be a little bit more information that can be conveyed to owners if you know the entire picture and not just, well, they charged me an extra, 50 hours for something that didn't seem like they should. If you know what was happening around that period of time, it may help make more sense of what they did and why they did it. Relocation and travel is always a big one. As far as control verification, ensure contractor and the owner have applied their control processes correctly. Financial reviews, make sure the contractor payables and billings are reconcilable and that the owner payments are actually reflected on both sides. So if the owner says they paid $20 million to date, make sure that the contractor shows that they were paid $20 million. Elements of a typical construction audit program, financial review, let's say the construction in progress. So that is actually the holding account for construction costs before the project is closed. So as an owner, you don't have a thing yet, you just have costs. So you put those costs in the construction in progress account or process account until you set it up as its individual assets or what have you. It's just in a holding account collecting the expense until it is transferred to the thing that is being built. Fixed assets, if someone on the owner side is identifying fixed assets, you want to make sure that's being done properly. If they're going to do a cost segregation study, basically the setup for property tax purposes, ensure the accounting process is adequate to capture the costs in the right bucket. And as far as audit reports go, you can look at bid processes and produce a specific report to that because that deals more with the purchasing function. And then a contract review. I'd say you don't want to intermingle a bunch of issues. You want to focus on the main points and contracts. After it's signed, your job is just to ensure they got what they asked for. But before that, you want to focus on the individual risks that are inherent in the contract, any conflicting terms or anything that's ambiguous. Trip reports. That's merely every time you go out to the project. You may set up an audit schedule at 20% completion, 50% completion, 75, and then at final, whatever makes sense for the type of project and your management's concerns. And the final report, that's really the closeout. That's where you're doing the major reconciliations and making sure that everything that is charged and billed to the project complies with the agreement, and you can tie a nice little bow on it and present it to your management. What should be contained in reports, you tailor it to the organization and what they need. It's whatever is keeping the stakeholders up at night, you want to be sure to address. As far as comments, you may ask for the contractor to comment on your findings. You may want the owner's rep to comment on your findings. But if you're like me during the audit process, anytime I come up with something, I'm communicating with the person that I'm auditing and I'm saying, did I see this correctly? And I'm trying to take care of a lot of that before it ever ends up in a report. Auditor selection. Your organization can hire internal or train your own staff. You can hire an experienced auditor to come in. I've been that person on several occasions. You can hire an external firm, public accounting firms. There are a lot of places that have this expertise in-house. No matter what someone looks like on paper, what a firm looks like, make sure that this is a person that you trust and that they appear very knowledgeable. we want to spend a lot of time talking to them and get an idea of the experience. Ideally, they're a partner with you and your organization on the project, and even internally. I mean, this is as much of a consulting type of position as anything else, because you will be working with and intimately familiar with this team far more than you would be maybe your normal accounts payable function or something in your day-to-day review of operations in your current position. Change orders, these are really, the only reason I brought this out into a separate slide is that these are mini contracts. Any change order, which is a change of scope of the prime contract, it requires a little extra review and special care taken, because if they're signed and they have terms that are not owner favorable, they can seriously alter or override existing terms in the contract, no matter the contract type. So change orders should take an additional level of review from an auditor and everybody involved in the process. And your typical findings. I'll run through all these very quickly. You've got defective pricing and change orders. So a contract will usually outline the process for pricing a change order: unauthorized items billed, labor overcharges, workers' comp rates, the application of rates fits with the classification codes of the individual employees. You might have federal unemployment tax, state unemployment tax that could exceed the limits that are established. So I think for federal, it's like $7,000. The first $7,000 of their pay is only subject to FUI. So you want to make sure that they're not continually applying a percentage to all labor if they're based on just an actual burden rate. You actually will have to dig in and test the components of their burden unless it's contractually negotiated percentage. General conditions. This could be issues related to anything from car allowances that aren't in the contract to something that's obviously personal experiences or expenses that are charged off to the job. And GL insurance, general liability, whether or not it was provided at the proper level. Sorry, I kind of blew through some of these because I'm trying to wrap us up here. And your typical findings: duplicate charges, equipment that's not in use, bonds not purchased, back charges that went through as actual project costs that should have gone back to the subcontractor that messed up the work, scrap not credited, material that was substituted but not authorized. So which types of contracts should be audited? I'm going to make it real easy: all types. Risk comes in many forms, and it comes down to the money involved and the risks inherent in the agreement, and how much time you as an auditor and your department have allocated to this process. When should the construction audits occur? You can begin at the planning process, but honestly, if you can get involved at the contracting side, so where they're developing the contract, you're actually probably within the small percentage of folks that are involved early, and I would consider you a true partner in the construction process. Most of the time, you end up getting involved somewhere in the construction process. But like I said earlier, if you can get involved at the contracting side, you're really able to make more of a difference in the construction process. And then finally, close out just making sure that everything billed was correct and that everything has a nice little bow. Your basic approach: contract analysis. You want to look at the control structure and the blueprint for the project organization. What are the risks based on the contract and the controls in place? You want to develop a work plan. How are you going to structure your initial report? How are you going to conduct your engagement? What times are you going to go out and look at the project? How you can conduct meetings? Who is it going to be with? And planning on how you're going to complete the work and add any other tests as necessary. Oftentimes, if you're involved in one of these projects, fires are going to come up and you're going to be requested to do special analysis. you could do entire audits around a specific labor issue or one change order. You just have to be working with management to know where their concerns are and where risk arises. And then, of course, the final report. On the contract analysis side, what are you looking for? Obviously, the contract type. Is it completed? The problem is you may have a contract in your hands. It may not actually be signed. You may not have all the exhibits and attachments. You want to make sure that you've got the final contract and it's complete. Even though a lot of that stuff may not seem to pertain to you, I find it helps because you never know what's going to be relevant and what you're going to need to refer to. Another important one is making sure that your contract has a right to audit clause. Obviously, if there's no right to audit, it limits your ability as an auditor. Now, at the very least, you want to make sure that there's at least a records retention clause in the contract that infers some right of review by the owner. You want to see how change order, extra work claims are processed in general conditions. You want to make sure that the definition of general conditions is there, it's well defined, and it's detailed. The work plan, you have an initial risk assessment, you're designing your tests to address those risks, and you're adding another test too, based on the analysis of the project. Basically, as you go along, things are going to come up, and you're going to see something that you didn't think was going to be a problem that either through interpretation or practice, it's kind of getting off the rails, and it's something that needs attention and needs to be quantified and stopped. And the quicker you can get involved in the process, once again, if you can keep money from getting paid rather than asking for it back after the fact, you've helped the owner quite a bit. Lastly, just so you know what you're looking at, what does a contractor billing look like? So this is that G702, G703 I mentioned at the very beginning. This is the format for the schedule of values. So you're going to have a line item number. You're going to have a description of the work. So that involves, let's say, plumbing, electrical, roofing, and a scheduled value, which is the component of the work that's attributed to that particular work function, like electrical, mechanical. And it will have its scheduled value. You add up all the scheduled values, you're going to get to the contract price. They will show the previously billed, whatever is billed this period, anything that is stored to date, and what is completed and stored to date. And then out to the right, you've got retainage calculations and what have you. Here you've got a place for the contractor to sign off that they have reviewed and that everything is correct, and that the architect has reviewed and agrees that the percentage of completion complies with what has been presented. So basically, some sort of reasonableness check to say that the billing accurately represents what's out there in the field. And that's where the contractor is signing off, and that's where the architect is signing off. So this has been kind of a whirlwind, and I stepped on the accelerator in the last little bit, but I was trying to finish up for us. If anybody's got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I've also provided my email, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to explain something in a lot greater detail or provide you with any information related to anything I covered or any other questions you got.
Warren, we had a couple come in. One attendee asks, I know it varies on objective and scope, but how many audit hours would you typically budget for a construction audit?
It
That's
depends.
kind of an open-ended.
Yeah, it is. It depends on the set of circumstances. I mean, okay, I've done let's say, a $30 million building. Okay, I might have 200 to 300 hours in audit. I may look at that a couple of times, just depending on my review of the contract and what I perceive to be the risks. I've worked on a $1 billion power plant, and that involved probably 1,500 hours of audit time. It really just depends on what you come across, the types of risks, and the issues that you need to dig into. I found it to be helpful that you're not out there doing like statistical sampling. I honestly, you're dealing with a contractor and you're asking, or you're potentially asking for millions of dollars back based on a finding, you need to have things nailed down almost at the transaction level. And that's going to require a little extra time to compile that information and put it into a format that is presentable and, you know, run it through all the necessary channels to get its blessing before you present it over to the contractor as a, you know, finding that you've got the full weight of, let's say, legal and the executive staff of your organization to support you.
She had a second question. Do you have some recommended resources for sample audit programs?
Once again, you're talking about an audit program that should be tailored to an agreement, and most agreements are not boilerplate. I mean, the devil's in the details. So if they've taken, let's say, an American Institute of Architects boilerplate and they've done some adjustment to it, it's going to change how your audit program should look. And something that can seem relatively minor can actually cause a drastic change or need for different testing procedures. So if you want to contact me about, you know, specific questions and give me a little bit more detail, I'd be happy to provide you with what I've got. But it really comes down to reviewing that contract and identifying where the key risk is. And if you've got some specific concerns about risk areas, I've got some suggestions I can make to you. But like I said, I've provided the email address and phone number. If you want to get in touch with me, I can provide you what I've got and see if I can help you out.
Yeah, she should. Last question. I think it's the last question. What type of logs should audit review? E.g., asset, contingency, CO log?
Oh, actually, if you've got, and that's something I didn't go into a lot of detail on, but contingency logs, anything that is a pot of money that is controlled by the contractor or some third party, where they're keeping track of how they are taking money in and out of that pot, I would suggest scrutinizing those logs greatly. I'm not a big fan of contractor contingency or any sort of pot of money that is not completely within the control of the owner. So I would look at that. Change orders, I would look at very heavily. Basically, if it affects the cost at the end of the day and it's not something that has a high level of visibility for the owner or the project manager, or it only has visibility to a very small group, I would take a look at that.
All right, Warren, I'm going to give you a chance to go back to your day, and thank you very much for your time and expertise. This is a subject, as we discussed early on, I think you could probably make it a week-long session of various depth and on the topics. So we thank you for the overview and the detail you were able to give us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign us off for this afternoon and thank everybody for attending. Thanks for you who hung in right to the end here, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Appreciate it, guys. Bye.
All right, take care, Warren.